money's different than campaign contributions to that?
Well, yeah, so that's an interesting point. You cannot give a campaign contribution to a legislator during a legislative session. There's a blackout period, and so you would have an issue on that. Yeah, that's the question. So if you know a legislator and you give them something of value, you're either giving them a campaign contribution. That could be an in-kind contribution. I mean, a plate of cookies can be an in-kind contribution to somebody's campaign. At the same time, though, if it's not really a campaign contribution and understood as that, it's either a kind of de minimis gift, which is okay, and that's like plaques, and it could be the cookies too, quite frankly, but then you end up with like an illegal honorarium, where you're giving something to a legislator on account of the fact that they're a legislator, and if it's for their personal benefit, that's not okay, unless you're registered as a lobbyist under the lobby law, and then there's just guidelines on it. You can only do, it used to be $90 a day. It's about to go, or has already gone to $126 a day that you can give if you're registered as a lobbyist. And that's give unreported, and then if you give them more than that, then you have to actually report that you certain paperwork that you gave it to them. Quite frankly, that's the big problem. Is it's a mess of paperwork. You need to hire a lawyer if you're going to do it. So don't do it. This is my recommendation because you're not a lobbyist. So.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah,
here?
go ahead.
And it talks about being a paid lobbyist. If I have a friend who's helping me with my travel expenses over here. Could that technically come down the road somewhere and bite me in the butt, or?
Yeah,
I mean, he's paying gas and parking.
Yeah, before you start telling me, I'm going to pretend you didn't tell me anything about what you do, and I'm going to talk about that subject in general sense, and you and I can talk separately. There is an exception for a person's own travel expenses. There is no exception for spending money on someone else's travel expenses. So what's interesting about that is a person who's paying your expenses could potentially have to register as a lobbyist. I do not know that means that you have to pay. That actually wouldn't mean you have to register. It's a risk on his part. So we'll talk and figure out what's right. But again, this is the problem. Basically, this is the problem with campaign finance law. This is the problem with lobby law. Anything you're talking about at its core, speech, people going out engaging in speech, and then there's a whole overlay of regulations on top of that, and all it is traps for the unwary. All it is a nest of trip ups that can come in to make you make a mistake where you have to then hire a lawyer, and that isn't the way this country is supposed to work. So that's why I say these things are unconstitutional. At its core, that's the core problem. Anyway, so I wanted to talk a little bit about those rules and how they impact you. I also wanted to go in a little bit, since people are probably interested in it, and give an update about what's happened with the House rules and the Senate rules over the last week or so. House rules largely haven't changed. The biggest change that's taken place is that the House has gone to an all-electronic filing system. And so, and I think the Senate duplicates this next session. It seems like things get tested out. The House is the guinea pig, and then the Senate, if it works, kind of picks it up. But they've got an all-electronic filing system, which is kind of a unique change. There's not as much paperwork involved. They actually do shuttle paperwork through the committee process, and that'll be interesting to see how that operates. But I don't know that really matters to the John Q. citizen. There was some expansion. I wrote an article about this when the House rules came out, I guess it was on day 2 or day 3 of the legislative session. There was an expansion of an investigatory committee, basically codifying the committee that's been looking into impeaching Wallace Hall. And when they did that, there was a certain expansion in terms of what that committee would be allowed to do in secret. And some of the conservatives came in and did a very effective job of cutting back that new rule to basically leave it at the status quo. So I think they did a very successful job going after that and doing that. There are certain changes in the House rules that were good. The Conservatives got some good changes to what needs to be included in a caption of a bill. So when you're on the Texas Legislature online website and you're looking through at a bill, you'll now see not only that if that bill increases or changes a tax, it has to include that in the caption, but it now has to have a statement about criminal justice changes. If there's, it increases a prison term, or it increases the penalty level for some crime, or creates a crime, that has to be in the caption. And likewise, a great new change, I'm very excited about this, just as a discussion driver. Matt Schaefer got a inclusion in there that if an occupational license is either created or changed or expanded, that'll have to be included in there, and that impacts a lot of people, who suddenly have to go to the state for permission to do their job. So those are a couple great changes in the House side. The big change is in the Senate, which many of you have probably heard. They did away with the 2/3 rule, which is I guess people are starting to understand a little more because of the debate. Basically, the Senate's real order of business is that bills are filed, they're referred to committee, they're voted out of committee, and then in the order that they're voted out of committee, that's the order that the Senate is expected to take them up. Well, the practice has been in the Senate, and will remain, that the first bill that's ever kicked out of committee is some mundane bill. They always used to call it the Rosebush bill. It's a lot of times called the blocker bill. But it was some bill dealing with a whole lot of nothing. And that was the bill that everybody was debating all session long. And then in order to go and pick up any other bill in the order, you had to use the parliamentary rules to say, well, 2/3 of us agree that we'll take this bill up and move it to the front of the line and talk about it right now instead of talking about rose bushes. Purpose of that, created back when we were a one-party state, almost all Democrats, was get kind of unify the Democrats and not have any. You wanted a large majority of the body to actually pass something, and it served a purpose in that sense. In the modern era, the problem has been that we now have a bipartisan state, or well, it's not exactly bipartisan, but there's a significant portion of Democrats. Those Democrats have played the obstructionist on a number of pieces of legislation and used essentially their more than 1/3 of the body as a veto over any conservative bill that they didn't like, kind of choosing their battles somewhat wisely. And so Dan Patrick campaigned on getting rid of that, and the compromise was we're going to move it to a 3/5 rule. So now it takes 19 members to bring a bill up out of that order, to go from talking about rose bushes to talking about pro-life bills or something like that. It's going to take 19 votes. There's 20 Republicans, so there's no longer a need to have a Democrat on board in order to do that, unless obviously you don't have all the 19 Republicans. So that's a major change. It should mean that things move more quickly in the Senate. The Lieutenant Governor has acted very quickly to appoint committees. So that's what we're at the process right now. We're waiting on House committees. Rumor mill is generally that's going to come down this week. So go ahead.
I'll let you finish your thought. On rules, where does the media credentialing rule change come in?
I'm intimately familiar. I was on a case related to media credentials, the denial of media credentials under the old rule. I will say, and I will let my opinion be free on this, with the current people in charge in the House, any change in the rules is dangerous. There's some bad people in charge of certain levers of power over in the House, and so that ends up being a dangerous thing to go to change. But on its first blush, looking at the rule, it's not an outrageous rule. They updated it in terms of technology to say, it's not just newspapers, we're talking about online entities, and they've been doing that in practice for a long time. We'd always kind of wondered, was that, what is an online? Is that a newspaper, or is that a news service? What is it? What is it? What of the 4 categories that were in there before is the Texas Tribune, for example, which obviously gets press credentials. So they updated the rule. The most concerning part, and we'll see if this actually comes to anything, they added a provision that any member of the legislature can challenge the credentials of a member of the press if they think that those credentials are not, they don't properly have them, or the obvious concern is, or if they don't like what that person has to say. And I don't know that there's a lot of restraint on that as an issue. And so you may see people get credentials and then have those credentials challenged, then to have a hearing and potentially have those taken away. My real question is there a judicial remedy to having those credentials revoked? I think there obviously should be. There's some certain separation of powers issues which could present a problem on that front. But there's it's not any kind of outrageous change. The practice so far has been pretty fair, and I would hope that they keep handling it in a fair way. Go ahead.
I was wondering if you could explain why Whitmire, I've been told, I hadn't confirmed, Whitmire's the chair of the Jurisprudence Committee
Criminal
again.
jurisprudence of the Senate.
Because I know there's a couple senators that are going to introduce some variation of constitutional carry. How's that going to get out of committee if he's anti-Second Amendment?
Well, I will say Whitmire of the Democrats probably the most pro-Second Amendment Democrat of the bunch, maybe with the exception of your Rusty. Hinojosa is not as bad. So I would not categorize Whitmire as some kind of far-left anti-gun guy, but I get your point.
In the 2013 legislature, he allowed a bill to get out of committee that would have negated all of the out-of-state CHLs, and Corona and Dallas crossed over and got that out with a vote on his side, because we got rid of him and Huffines is in now. But, I mean, that was an outrageous bill, and he let it get out of committee.
But to answer your question, so something dealing with gun rights would not necessarily have to go through criminal jurisprudence. Could potentially go through state affairs. And so that's not the only avenue through which a bill like that could go. I think the general takeaway around the legislature was that Patrick was going to appoint, and given just kind of the current seniority of members, was going to appoint at least one or two Democrats to chair committees. Whitmire's been a long time kind of subject matter expert on prisons and just the criminal justice system, and so I think that was one of those areas where it just made political sense to do it. But I definitely recognize that's a problem. I think the pressure needs to be, if I was going to say that the pressure needed to be anywhere, it would be on the lieutenant governor to make sure that the bill isn't given to Whitmire and then that he isn't allowed to sit on it. To the extent he's going to move it and give it a fair shake and a fair vote, then it's probably not a problem to go there. If he isn't, then it needs to go through a different committee, because I don't think that it has to go through criminal jurisprudence. So I hope that kind of answers your question. All right. Well, I'm gonna close off to the extent. Well, I guess what I'll say is where we're at in the process right now. There's an opportunity to look at the legislation that's been filed. It's still early enough, I think, though the window is closing, to talk to your legislators about bills that you want them to consider or want them to file. That'll be closing off in the next few weeks, where for a practical effect, if you ask somebody to file a bill for you, that bill would have a chance of passing during this legislature. There's never anything wrong with filing something late and laying groundwork for next session. That's not a bad idea. Go ahead.
What is the deadline?
Well, the filing deadline isn't until somewhere like the first week of March. So there's a lot of time technically to file, but by that time, there's already a backlog of bills that are in committees, and it's impractical to expect that a bill filed that last week will actually make it through the process. It's just a very tight process. So I would say right now, if you have something on your mind, now's the time to be working with members that you know to actually do that. It's also time to take a look at who's been appointed where and to do what. and figure out who's got what subject area so that you can go talk to those who actually deal with some issue that you're passionate about. Anyway, so I think the next speaker is John Seago, Texas Right